Hey, what up, old tree group? So just checking in from the studio, let my hair down. We're going to talk about something that I've been mentioning over some of my past videos about solvent-free oil painting. Now, if you have watched some of my old videos, you probably know that I am a nature lover, tree hugger, call me what you will. Bottom line, I really do care about the environment, and I care about the human impact on the environment and the world around us. So I try to take that concern into my studio and really think about the type of materials that I'm using. You know, not just trying to avoid toxic materials for my own health, but for the health of the planet around me. So, you know, a lot of times when people hear or think about painting with oils, they think that it's a, complicated toxic process with a lot of, toxic fumes and need for good ventilation and all that. And while the conventional methods that may be true, there is an alternative way, and it's called painting solvent free. So it's something that works for me, and I've been doing this style of painting over the last 10 years and have come to some good conclusions about it. So I thought I'd just go over with you guys some of the products that I use with my paintings. And this is kind of the base for what I use. All the oil paints that I paint with are walnut oil paints. So traditionally you see a lot of paints are mixed with linseed oil. I prefer walnut oil. The reason why is I think walnut oil doesn't quite yellow as much as linseed oil does over time, and it's a little bit slower drying, which, for some oil painters that's a challenge. Like, they don't like having to wait for drying time, but for me, I kind of like working wet on wet, and I like to keep that viscosity going as long as possible. So walnut oils have treated me well, but linseed oil is not a toxic oil in and of itself. When you get into the toxic elements of oil paint, as far as the fumes that we're breathing, the main culprit is solvent. And this is an example right here of a product from Gamblin that's called Gamsol. This is a solvent, and I have to say these guys have come a long way. Like Gamblin, the company Gamblin, I think they really do care about public health, and they're trying to make a better product. So if you are going to have to use a solvent, or you want to experiment with different styles of oil painting, by all means, see what's out there. There was a time in my painting career where I wanted to see what was out there, and I did use Gamsol. This is, if you are going to use a paint thinner, this one's probably as good as any. There are natural terpenoids now. They're just things that are low VOC or whatever, that you still need to have good ventilation when you're working with a product, even like this Gamsol stuff here. Like, this is going into the air, and it might not be as bad as some of the old school stuff, that drove a lot of artists crazy in the past, but this stuff is still toxic, and it's really not a renewable resource, and it's like it comes from fossil fuel source. So I avoid it. I try to paint with just oil, basically oil. That's all I use, walnut oil, and I use walnut oil paint, and it takes some time to dry, but some paints are dry faster than others, and you can always look on the back of your paint tube to find out. So the company that I use that makes this walnut oil is called M. Graham. And there may be other companies out there. I like these guys. They're basically a pretty big competitor with Gamblin, two West Coast companies that I both like. I like both their products, and I would say you can mix and match. Like, you don't necessarily have to mix walnut oil with walnut oil paint. You can use linseed oil paint and mix it with walnut oil, or vice versa. You could add linseed oil to walnut oil paint. Experiment, see what happens. So I can use walnut oil as a medium for glazes. If I get a opaque color base to dry, I can go over the top of it with a thinned out paint with walnut oil to use as a glaze. I also just use walnut oil as a basic medium to get the oil paint to the consistency that I like to work with. I kind of like a more inky, wet paint. I usually am not using really thick paints these days. So I add a little walnut oil, thin it out a little bit. Also, walnut oil can be used for cleaning your brushes, which is another great use of it. And I do that, you know, I try to keep my brushes as clean as possible so I'm not wasting a ton of brushes, because that can happen. And that's pretty much, that's the way I paint. Very simple. You know, the only potential toxic substances that I'm working with are the pigments themselves that are in the oils. And I haven't done enough research to really be able to tell you, you know, about the environmental impact of these different pigments and where they're sourced from and all that. You know, I'd really like to get more into that. If anybody does have information about that or wants to share, please leave some comments below. You know, I know like ochre is a really sweet pigment that you can find, you know, in different parts of the world. It's kind of like a type of stone almost that grinds down really easy. I mean, I don't know the right terminology for this stuff, but you know, and then I think a lot of other mediums that used to be made from precious stones and pigments like the blue, I believe, like ultramarine blue, used to come from, I'm racking my mind right now, I'm being very forgetful. It's one of my birthstones, but it's a lapis maybe? L-A-P-I-Z? Don't take me for that for sure, but it's a blue rock, and back in the day I guess that blue paint was like really exclusive and very expensive and hard to get your hands on. So now I think they're doing something else. I don't know what, I don't know if it's good or bad, but you know, ultramarine blue is an easy color to come by. And we got so many colors to work with now, like through the history of paint and color. Like we're in an era right now of technology, and some of these companies like Gamblin have done some great things with the Smithsonian and recreating colors of the past from the Renaissance all the way up to, you know, modern, postmodern, really bright, vivid colors, which is what I really like to work with. I just like super real, intense color in a lot of my paintings, so hopefully I'll be able to share more of my work with you. But you know, if you do want to experiment with some other mediums that in my mind aren't quite as environmentally friendly but are still working on it, and you know, I don't think it's the answer just to totally cut yourself off necessarily. Just do what feels right to you. I mean, I think at the end of the day, that's what it's all about. Like, you got to do what feels right to you. So for me, I'm working on trying to use as environmentally friendly products as possible. But you know, at one time I was mixing in some of this, which is another product from M. Graham, who make the walnut oil paint and mediums. This is a medium that's a alkyd resin. So I believe alkyd is sourced from fossil fuels. This stuff is pretty cool though. It will help your paint dry a bit faster. So it could be good for using in an underpainting, or if you needed something to dry a little bit quicker, this stuff can help you out a bit. You know, it's still going to take at least 24 hours for the most part to get something to dry with oils. But this is a pretty good product, and it can also be used for glazing. You know, you want to go really light-handed with this stuff. You don't want to put a lot of this down. And I'm not like a medium expert here. I'm just telling you guys like the best that I know. But I started experimenting with this stuff when I was really getting into the gamblin products, and I really wanted to just see what different techniques and properties I could get from my paint and my materials. So this is some pretty cool stuff here. This is called Neo McGilp or something like that. Correct me if I'm wrong. A very cool medium because you can actually get a textured glaze with this. So glaze is basically like a transparent coat of paint. And this stuff, you can make it like a thick, transparent coat of paint. And a lot of times, you know, the value of doing multiple layers of glazes is the properties of light. And when the light hits a painting like that, you have this reaction where the light is like bouncing around within those layers before it bounces back at you and hits you in the eye. So it has a really cool effect that can almost make a painting look like it's glowing from the inside. If you've seen some old Renaissance paintings, you know that was kind of a classical approach to painting, of using multiple layers of glazes. With people's faces, a lot of times with skin tones, they would start with like a really gray skin. If you saw it, you think that they were painting somebody that was like sick or dying. and then they would, you know, brighten it up and bring it to life with all these layers of glazes, and then when you hit that thing with some light, it shines from the inside. It's an amazing effect. So I kind of wanted to experiment with some things like that. And then this is kind of like Gamblin's alkyd medium. This is called Galkyd, and it is fast drying. I think it's their fastest drying medium, so you can add this to paint to get it to dry faster. It has a really nice like viscosity and feel to it, so you can use it to get your paint to the right consistency so it really flows off the brush. And you can also use this stuff for glazing. It is a very glossy medium, so it is going to have a glossy effect as well. If you wanted to change that, Gamblin also makes a wax medium. You can add a little bit of wax medium to something. It's going to bring the finish down. It's going to bring it down to a matte finish. So wax mediums are also good, you know, and I think the source for the wax mediums is probably petroleum based. I'm not 100% on that. I believe that there are possibilities of getting other naturally sourced wax mediums that could be very interesting to experiment with. Wax mediums oftentimes can be used to bring out some great texture in a painting. If you like that like thick brush work, then that may be the route to go for you. But these are all just things to experiment with, and I've had a really good time in the past just trying new things and seeing how my work evolves with the different mediums and materials that I'm using. And right now in my life, in my stage, I'm just keeping things really simple. I love using the walnut oil paint and just walnut oil, and when I'm painting outdoors, like, I feel like it's really easy to pack with me. It has the right properties that I'm looking for in terms of the drying time and the feel of the paint that I can get. So that's where I'm at with my painting right now. I'd love to hear what your thoughts are about, you know, toxic materials in the art studio. And I mean, I remember when I first started art school, they said that by the time you were middle-aged, which, you know, I'm in my 30s, I'm getting up there, you could lose your mind. And I think a lot of artists are crazy in the first place. So yeah, take care of yourself. Don't breathe any toxic fumes. Peace.